Today we're handing over to Calvin Serrano, a VFX artist from Germany who helped us on Rise of the Dark Side.
This is part 1 of a 2-part tutorial. Today Calvin is going to show you how he scanned Ollie into a 3D model, then used Blender to simulate throwing him into a tree.
First off, let's start up with the equipment. You can use any camera that can be set to manual use. For photo scanning, the general rule is the more pixels the better, and you should use a lens with around 24mm or lower that doesn't distort the image. You will also want to take some C-stands with you for stabilizing the actor. And of course you need a computer. And in this case, an NVIDIA graphics card that can support CUDA. Let's get to the second part, the preparation. In the case you want to photo scan an actor or a person, you want to have as much detail as possible in the clothing, since photo scanning is basically tracking thousands of points on an object. You should also avoid all glossy, transparent or reflective materials on your clothing or the actor. Next up is the location. Find a soft-lit environment with unchanging light and background. An inner courtyard, conference room or a street on a cloudy day should work just fine. You can also set up your own lights if it's needed. Put your actor or the object you want to scan in the middle of the space, since you need a lot of space to move around. Have the actor do the T-pose with a bit wider spread legs. This will work best for the most cases, since we see all surfaces clearly, like the armpits and the space between the thighs. The less one object occludes the other, the better. But it should still look natural. We need as little movement as possible to have a good result. The actor should also focus his eyes on something in the distance and not talk during the photo process. Now we will set up the camera. First off, put all the camera settings on manual, so it doesn't adjust anything automatically. The shutter should be around 100 to avoid motion blur. Set the white balance to the current lighting. In my case I used the cloudy preset. The ISO should be set up so that we are one step away from clipping the highlights on the actor. If the background clips a little bit, that's okay. The f-stop should be 4 or higher, to have the actor and the background as much in focus as possible. Let's get into taking the pictures. Make sure that when you move around the actor, you don't cast any shadow onto him. This would confuse the scanning program later on. For the first round, frame the whole actor in shoulder height, so that there's still some space between him and the edges of the frame. Start from the front and walk around the actor once, keeping the same distance and taking a picture every step. For the second round, frame the actor the same way, but this time from knee height. For the third round, do the same framing, but this time raise the camera as high as you can. Now we will take a few additional close-ups of parts from the actor that are important for the shot, like head, shoulders, hands, thighs and feet. Alright, back on the PC, the first thing you want to do is copy over your files. The next thing you want to do is download Meshroom. Meshroom is a very straightforward and easy to use program, so all we gotta do is just drag and drop all the images we have into this window right here. Once the images are imported, go through them one by one and check if something is off. Like in this one, for example, his eyes are closed. You don't want that. So just go ahead and remove this one. In general, you don't want like closed eyes or blurry pictures or movement. So if you can find any of those things in a picture, just remove it from this list. Okay, so I deleted the ones that don't fit, and now you only have to press start and it will ask you to save. And yeah, you should always save. So press save and save it somewhere where your project files are anyway. Now that it's saved, let's press start again. And you will see it will start going through this list of notes. You don't really have to change any of the settings here. You can go into the notes and like change settings. But the settings that are in there by default are already like pretty good. This will take some time. Depending on the amount of images you have, it can take also more than 1 hour. Now it's finished and we can see a point cloud on the right side here. Just go ahead and press this load model button. When you see the 3D model, just hide the structure from motion and you will only see the model. You can rotate by left clicking and just panning around, and you can move around with the middle mouse button. You can also zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. So the result looks pretty good for the most part. The feet are very good and also the arms are pretty okay, but the face has something weird going on. It almost looks to me like some pictures are confusing the program, like we have a double nose here and the eye is a bit lower on this side than over here. So yeah, I think I will go ahead, like go through the pictures again and see if I can find something weird and just delete them and recalculate. Welcome to the second attempt. This looks much better now. I just deleted the close-up pictures we took later on, like these right here, since I think he moved a bit during the photo progress, so when we took these pictures later on, his face and head was already like in a different position or something. That can happen sometimes, so you really want to make sure that your actor doesn't move during the photo process. If you started to wonder why I didn't show you the process with Ollie, who we actually used in the short film, it's because we did a few mistakes while photo scanning him. That's why I wanted to show you the proper way of doing it from scratch with a new model. But yeah, this is 3D scanned Ollie, and it didn't turn out that well. You can see like a lot of weird edges and yeah, just like overall it looks a bit weird, a bit blurry, a bit spiky, especially like his head over here. There are lens flares moving across Ollie from the bright background. That's definitely something you want to avoid when taking pictures. Another thing is that the light isn't very soft in this environment, it's very directional. Another problem here is that Ollie's outfit doesn't have a lot of detail. As you can see, his jacket and t-shirt are very plain, and the shoes are also pretty reflective if you look at them closely. Welcome to the Blender and simulation part of the tutorial. You will see on the left corner, right here, the buttons that I'm pressing. So if you're wondering which button does what, you can always look right here. First off, let's delete everything by pressing A. A selects everything in the viewport, and then press X to delete, and yeah, just click on this delete again, and everything should be gone. Now we're going to import our 3D model from the Meshroom. You will see in the folder where you saved your Meshroom project file also a Meshroom cage folder. And if you open it up, you see every folder for each of the node steps. And in the last one, texturing, you will find the textured mesh. It's in one of these. It's this one, yeah. Alright, so just copy this file path. And in Blender, let's go into File, Import, OBJ, and then just paste the file path right here. And yeah, select the textured mesh and import OBJ. Now that it's imported, I will introduce you to the basic navigation features. So for orbiting around, just hold down the middle mouse button and you will orbit around. For zooming in and out, just use the mouse wheel. And to pan left and right, hold down Shift and the middle mouse button. You also have all of these functionalities on the right side here. With this gizmo right here, you can also orbit around. You can also click on any of these axes and you will snap into that position. And you can pan around with this one and zoom in and out with this one. Now activate X-ray mode right here. This will give us a bit more understanding about our chaotic mesh. At this point I also like to activate quad view. Hold down Ctrl, Alt and Q and your view will split into these 4 different views. You still have your normal perspective view up here, but the other ones are flat from only one direction. This one example is X, this one is Y, and this one is Z. What I also like to do for this is adding a reference mesh. For that, just go into Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Rigify. This one right here. Just activate it and close the settings again. Now we can go into Add, Armature, Basic, Basic Human. Now we have a basic human bone structure right here. This bone structure is also properly scaled, so we can use it as a reference. We can open up our side menu right here and look into dimensions. Here we see it's 1.98 meters high. So if you want to have your character smaller or bigger, make sure you have your bone selected with left click. You can select objects with left click or right here in the outliner. So yeah, select the meta rig. And with pressing S, you can scale it up or down. And doing that, you will see the dimensions changing too. So yeah, I'll just cancel this by right-clicking and leave it at the default value. You can also open and close this menu with N. Something that I also like to do at this point that will be more handy later on is changing the shading settings. You have your 4 different shading menus up here: wireframe, solid, material preview, and rendered. Let's stay in solid for now and open up the settings right here. Select random in color. That way every object will have a random color and it will be easier to understand the scene. Now we're going to move the mesh around so it fits the reference bones. First, make sure the cursor, this little white and red circle right here, is in the center. If it's not, press Shift S and cursor toward origin. That will reset it to the center. Now we have to change the transform pivot point to cursor. We can do this right here. Select 3D cursor, and now all the transformations you do to an object will start where the cursor is. So now select the mesh and rotate it and move it so our character lines up with the bones. To rotate, you can just press R in any viewport. It will rotate it in that direction. To move something, press G. You can always accept a change with the left mouse button or cancel it with the right mouse button. Our mesh is also still much smaller than the reference. So press S for scale, so you can scale it up. The top of the head should end up with the top of the last bone. I will also save the project file now. Just go into File and Save. Now that our character is roughly in place, we can go into Edit mode. For that, make sure the textured mesh is selected and change from Object mode to Edit mode. We can also deactivate the quad view again now, with Ctrl-Alt-Q. Now press Alt-A to deselect everything. Alright, what we want to do is cut off the mesh around the feet. For that, press C and you will see a little circle. You can make it small and bigger with the mouse wheel, and with left click you can select. So, just draw around the feet. You'll have to press right click again if you want to move the camera around. Get into a better position and then press C again and keep on selecting. Now that we have it painted out, press X and delete the vertices. Now we want to select the island of polygons that we separated. For that, hover your mouse over this island and press L. This will select all the polygons that are connected to each other. Now press Ctrl-I to inverse the selection. And again X and vertices to delete it. You can go back into object mode now and look at the result. We can also deactivate X-ray mode again. Alright, now we want to add a new mesh, a cube. Alright, move this cube down by either pressing G for grab and Z to just move it on the Z axis, or select the move tool right here. You want the cube to cover all of the floor, so around this height. Now we want to activate another add-on. For that, go into Preferences again and activate the Bool tool. Alright. Select the cube first and then with Shift the character. You can also do this in the outliner by pressing on the cube and then here with Control on the textured mesh. Now go to Object, Bool tool, and under Auto Boolean choose Slice. Now we have two separate objects, the one on top and the one on the bottom. We can delete the one on the bottom. And you will see we have the feet very cleanly cut off. For the next steps, we want to have the rig a bit more visible. For that, select the rig, go into Object Settings, and Viewport Display, display as wire, and activate in front. With the rig selected, we can switch back into Edit mode, and now we will delete bones that are not necessary for the physics simulation. For example, the breast bones. Press X and bones, and these hip bones right here. And also the heel and toe bones. Now change from edit mode to pose mode. And also change the transform pivot point to median point. Activate the quad view again, and also activate the transform tool. You also want to change the transformation orientation to local. Now we will adjust the rotation of every bone to fit the original mesh. When you're done with that, press Ctrl A and apply pose as rest pose. You can also change the view settings to texture now. Until now we completely worked in the default collection, but we want to add a new collection. So press right click on Scene Collections and click on New. You can double click on the collection to rename it and just call it Old. This way we can save old models in case we want to revert something. Go back into object mode and select the mesh. We will duplicate it with Shift D and press right click to have it snap back, and then just drag and drop the new mesh into old. You can also go ahead and hide the old collection right here. Now we will clean up the photo scanned mesh a little bit. Select it and go into modifiers. Add a smooth modifier and set the repeat to something like 30. The mesh should be smoother, but it shouldn't be too smooth. So I think this is like a good middle point. Now also add a decimate modifier. If we extend the panel a bit by click and dragging on the edges here, you can see that the current face count is 302,000, and that's way too much for physics simulations. We will try to get it down to around 15,000 by changing the ratio value. I'll start with 0.1. Alright, that's better, but we can still go lower. Let's try 0.05. You will start seeing now that we have less detail, but we can change this by changing the appearance under Object and Shade Smooth. So now it doesn't look that much worse than before. Apply the modifiers from top to bottom now, by just clicking Apply on the first, and then Apply on the second. Now we also want to apply the transformations we did to the model by pressing N, and you'll be able to see the location and rotation is all messed up. So press Ctrl A and apply all transforms. Now everything is reset, and if we have to reset the mesh, it will be in this position again. Select the mesh first and then the rig, and press Ctrl P for parenting, and select with automatic weights. You will notice the mesh disappeared from this list right here, but it's actually just in the meta rig now. So if you open it up, you can find it right here. When you select the meta rig and go into pose mode, you can change the position and rotation of the individual bones, and you will see how the mesh will follow. But make sure to not change the pose at this point. Back in object mode, go into Add, Mesh and Plane. You can scale this up a little bit with S and just type in the number 10. This will make it 10 times bigger. Make sure everything you added until now is in the default collection, so just drag and drop the plane into the collection. With the plane selected, go to Object, Rigid Body and add Passive. Passive rigid bodies are objects that don't move but interact with other bodies. Now we will start with the actual ragdoll simulation. For that, I will be using the ragdoll tools, which costs something. You can get it yourself too, since it's making the progress a lot easier. But I will also provide you with a link to do it without this tool. So yeah, when you download it, go back into Blender and Preferences. And now when you're in Add-ons, go to Install up here and search in Downloads for the ragdoll tools. Select it and click Install Add-on. Then you will find it in the list right here. Just activate it here again and you should be ready to go. There's one more add-on that I want you to install that's very useful. It's called Visual Limits, and you can download it by clicking this button here and download zip. And then, when it's downloaded, just extract the .py file and install it the same way as you did with the ragdoll tool. It's called Visual Limits. Just activate it and let's go. So what you want to do now is select the meta rig and you want to press F3. This will bring up the search menu. So if you're searching for any functionality inside of Blender, you can probably find it in here. So we are going to look for ragdoll, and here it is, ragdoll tools pie menu. and select Generate Hitboxes. This little window down here opened up, so extend it, and in Mesh, select Bones. You also want to select Use Bone Envelope. That way the bones already have a bit better structure. You will see the add-on created a new collection that's called Ragdoll Hitboxes. You first want to select one of the objects in this collection and then right click on the collection and select Objects. Now go into the Object Properties and Viewport Display, and while clicking Alt, click on Display As and Wire. When you hold down Alt and change something, it will change it for all the objects that you have selected at this moment. So do this again, holding down Alt and pressing in front. And now we will always see the hitboxes. Now if we press play, you will notice that the rectangle is just falling apart. That's because we don't have any constraints between the hitboxes and the bones yet. So while you still have all the hitboxes selected, open the ragdoll tools again and choose Generate Rigid Body Constraints. Now what you want to do here is changing the generic type to generic spring and activate all the spring angle properties by just dragging down here. If we play the animation now, you will see it's working already. There are a few things that I still want to change, and I'll show you what those are. First of all, we can hide the collection for the ragdoll hitboxes, so we only see the constraints. And if we select a constraint, you can see with these angle visualizations how much the bone can actually rotate. So for example, for the elbow, you don't want it to be able to rotate more to the back. So select it. Let's select both elbows so we can change them at the same time. Go into Physics Properties, and while holding Alt, change the X values. Change the X values to something more realistic. Now it can't move all the way back, but it can move more towards the chest. Now basically repeat this with every bone that needs adjustment. We can also hide the meta rig now, and hide the constraints and show the hitboxes again. Now we're gonna adjust the hitboxes a little bit to fit better with the shape of the mesh. For example, for the head, I'll activate Quad View again with Ctrl-Alt-Q, and then I'll go into Edit mode. Activate X-Ray again, and now I will select the top vertices with C, paint over them, and now I can move and scale them around with the Transform tool. We can use this to make it fit the head shape a bit better. You can also deselect vertices with middle mouse button in the selection mode. Just do this for some of the bones that are not quite right yet. You can also select and edit multiple objects at the same time. With the shoulder bones right here we have a little problem, because when we play the physics simulation, you can see them pushing apart, and we don't want that. So you need to select one of them, and only select the top part here, and then just move the selection a bit to the right. Do the same with the other side too. And now it works. When you're happy with the adjustments, select the whole ragdoll hitboxes group again and go to Object, Rigid Body, Calculate Mass, and select Beans Soy. This will calculate the mass of each individual bone so that the body parts have a more realistic weight. I think I want to adjust the stiffness of the simulation a bit. For that, I'll activate the constraints again and select the whole collection. And then while pressing Alt, click into the stiffness and change 10 to 2 for all the axes. Maybe even 1. Yeah, I think this looks more natural. The head is also moving in a weird way. So I will select the head constraints, these ones here, and just lower all of these values to like -10 and 10. Let's see. Yeah, that's a bit better. Now show the hitboxes again and select the center one. Go into the physics properties and activate animated. Now if you extend the timeline up a bit and open the side menu to the left here, we can extend this and we will see all the keyframes we're making. So on the side of animated, click this little button here and you will add a keyframe for the first frame of the animation. If you play it now, you will see this bone won't move. Go into the objects properties and activate the keyframes for the location too. Now move forward to frame 5 and move the hitbox to a position where you want your actor to fly towards. And then click on the side here again to add new keyframes. Now if you play it from the start, you see the hitbox is offset for some reason. That's because we have to have the transformation animation at least one frame after the rigid body animation. So select the transformation keyframes and move them with G one frame to the right. Now if we play it, it's staying where it's supposed to be. Now go back into the physics properties, go to the frame where your animation stops and deactivate animated and add a keyframe. So now if you play it, you see he's just flying off. You can also now easily adjust the force by just picking the last keyframe of the transformation and moving it to the right. If you don't want to see any of these helpers, you can also press this button here and it will deactivate all the overlays. You might still see some glitches, like here with the foot, it's starting to spaz out. For that, you want to go into the scene properties, into rigid body world, and change the steps per second to a higher number, like 120. You see, it's much more stable now. Alright, now we're gonna actually set this up for our shot. First off, let's open HitFilm and import the footage. Let's create a composite shot out of this, but change the resolution to HD, so 1280 by 720. Now we just need to adjust the size. For that, right click on the footage and transform it to frame width. Now go to the export settings right here and choose the default preset PNG sequence and export now in and out area. We are doing this to get a low-res version into Blender to have it play back in real time. So now open up Blender again and under add a camera. You can look through the camera with this button right here. There's a special navigation method that you can use to move the camera like a first-person shooter. To use it, open the search menu with F3 and type in View Navigation. And now you can look around with the mouse, and with WASD you can fly around. With left click you accept and with right click you cancel. Again, make sure that the camera is part of the default collection. If you cannot find it in the outliner, you can also just left click on it and press M to choose in which collection it should be. Now go into camera settings and activate background images. You can expand this and click on add image. Now click open right here and navigate to the exported image sequence. Select the first image and you should be able to see it. In this menu here, change depth to front and also change source to image sequence. Here in frames you have to put in the number of frames the image sequence has. For that you can also go back into HitFilm and change the time display to frames. Go to the last frame and you'll see you have 60 frames. So type in 60 frames and when you play it back you see it moving. Now you want to use this offset value here to have the video start right in that moment where the ragdoll should be activated. So let's go with this frame right here. Yeah, that should fit. Now we have to roughly line up the footage with the 3D scene. For that, open the side menu again and first off check what height the camera is in. Since the camera is in about eye level of the actress, you will find the focal length right here in the camera properties. We used a 24mm lens, so you can just type in the value that you used. I will use the view navigation for that again. With Q and E, you can also go higher or lower. I always start up with trying to line up one of the feet and getting the scale right. Now let's get him into the starting pose. Show the hitboxes and the constraints. Click on this little filter button right here in the outliner and activate this selection button. So now we can choose which objects can be selected and which can't. So deactivate selection for the meta rig and the mesh and the plane, so that we can position the rest freely. I will activate X-ray to be able to select everything, and now with C I will just paint over all the objects. Now go back a frame to frame 0 and press I while the objects are selected and select location and rotation. Now we have a keyframe for all the objects just in case we mess up. Now we can go back to the first frame and adjust the pose. If you're planning to animate a lot, press this auto keyframe button. This way, when you change something, it will automatically add a keyframe. So now we will move the hips into hip position, and you will see we've got a new keyframe here. At the transform pivot point, select active element, and now select all the constraints and hitboxes from the right leg. At last you want to select the first constraint of the leg, and then with C and left mouse button deselect it again. That way you get the gizmo at that position. And when we change to rotation mode, go back to the camera view, we can rotate the whole leg from that position. Repeat this for every joint. The positioning doesn't have to be perfect in this shot since he's flying away pretty fast. But when you're finished, deactivate the auto keyframe button and give it a play. I will reset the cursor by pressing Shift S and cursor to world origin. And now I will select the floor. Oh, I first have to make it selectable again. Select the floor and scale it up 4 times so it covers the whole floor. Now under add, I will add a mesh and cylinder. We can use this cylinder as a physics interaction object with the trees. Scale it up as high as a tree, but also make it a bit thinner. With the move tool again, we can move it to the position of the tree. Move this object into the main collection again. And with the cylinder selected, go into Objects, Rigid Body and add Passive. Now we're going to adjust the direction he's flying into. For that, make the hitboxes visible again and select the one that you animated. First of all, I will delete the last 2 keyframes I did before for the animation. Select it, press X and delete keyframes. Now go to frame 2 and add with I another location rotation keyframe. And now move to 1 frame before the physics start again. So this is frame 5 for us. I will change to the top view so we have a better view of the scene and where the tree is. So now I will just move the object to the tree. And also move it a little bit upwards with G and Z, like this, so he flies up too. And now I will press I and add a keyframe for location and rotation. Let's see how this looks. Okay, this is way too fast, so we will grab the last keyframe for the object and just move it back a little bit. This way we basically just reduce the force. We can deactivate the overlays again to have a clearer view. And now, I think I'm going to make it a bit faster still. Yeah, that looks kind of funny. I like that. You can also set the last frame for the animation now. You see the footage cuts out at this point anyway. So we're gonna set 41 as our last keyframe. You can just Ctrl C and Ctrl V from the current frame to the last frame. Alright, let's hide the hitboxes and make everything selectable again. So now we are getting into rendering. Go into the render settings tab right here and change the render engine from Eevee to Cycles. Eevee is a pretty good, almost real-time render engine, but Cycles has the better motion blur, which is pretty important for a shot like this. So activate motion blur, let's look into the settings. Yeah, half a shutter is fine. And under film, activate transparent. That way we will have an alpha background. If you notice your ragdoll breaking when scrolling through the timeline, that's because the animation is not baked yet. Let's fix that right now. So go into the scene properties, and under rigid body world, open cage and bake. So now, it doesn't matter where you scroll, the animation is baked in. Also for the Cycles render engine, you can either use your CPU or your GPU. If your GPU doesn't show up, I'll select mine right now. But if yours doesn't show up, go into Edit, Preferences, System, and up here you can activate your GPU by pressing on the code it's using. Select all the objects that you have just for interaction, like the floor and the tree, and go into Object Settings, Visibility, and deactivate Ray Visibility Camera. Don't forget to hold down Alt to change the setting for every selected object. We will set up the lighting now. To be able to see that, we have to activate the render preview right here, and it will load the texture and everything to render. While it's doing that, select the camera, and in the camera properties, change the depth of a background image to back, and also make it fully opaque. Since this is a super soft lit environment, we can just go into the world properties and change the background color here to a brighter color. We also don't need to see the skeleton anymore, so just hide it. But Ollie is looking very contrasty right now, especially in contrast to the other footage. So go into the render settings, under color management, in look, choose very low contrast. So this will give us much more to work with later on. Now we can go to a frame that we like and do a little test render. I will use this impact frame right here. Go to render and select render image. So yeah, this looks good to me. I think we're ready to render it out. You can close this render pop-up again and go into the output settings, and right here we can select what file format we need. PNG with RGB alpha is fine, and for the output just select a folder where you want to have that image sequence. Now here's a little trick to save some render time. You can just scrub through the timeline and see where Ollie is actually flying through the space. So for this shot, it's just from here to here. Press Ctrl B while in camera view and draw a box around this area. So this way, Blender knows that it only needs to render this area of the image. Now we're ready to render. Go to Render and Render Animation. It will go through every image now and render every image individually. That's it for the photo scanning and ragdoll physics simulation tutorial. I want to thank Claudio Oliverio for being my photo scanning model. See you in the next tutorial, where I will show you how to composite this render.
This is part 1 of 2 tutorials, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when we next upload.